In the bleak midwinter of 1776, as snow fell silently over the eastern seaboard, the American Revolution teetered on the edge of disaster. General George Washington, leading a ragtag army of weary men, faced the prospect of total defeat. The British, bolstered by their fearsome Hessian allies, had driven the Continental Army across the Delaware River, and the morale of the fledgling nation was at an all-time low. But in the early hours of December 26th, something extraordinary happened, a moment of audacity and courage that would forever change the course of history. What drove these men, many of whom were on the brink of collapse, to risk everything in a daring nighttime assault? What was it about the Battle of Trenton that has kept it enshrined in the annals of military history? Today, we dive deep into this pivotal moment, uncovering the secrets, the strategies, and the sheer willpower that turned the tide of the American Revolution. Stay with us as we unravel the mystery of the Battle of Trenton, a battle where the stakes couldn't have been higher. As the year 1776 drew to a close, the situation for the Continental Army was dire. After a series of crushing defeats in New York and New Jersey, Washington's forces had dwindled to just a few thousand men. Supplies were scarce, and many soldiers' enlistments were set to expire at the end of the year. The British, confident in their impending victory, had established winter quarters, and the Hessians, known for their discipline and brutality, were stationed in the small town of Trenton. It seemed the revolution was on the verge of collapse. The idea of American independence, once so full of promise, now appeared to be nothing more than a fading dream. But Washington was not ready to give up. He knew that in order to save the cause of liberty, he needed a victory, something to rally the troops and reignite the hope of the people. And so he devised a plan that would go down in history as one of the most daring military maneuvers ever attempted. December 25th, 1776. The air was bitterly cold, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and makes every movement a struggle. Yet, on the banks of the Delaware River, the men of the Continental Army gathered, ready to undertake a mission that could very well be their last. Washington had carefully selected these men. Many were veterans, hardened by months of grueling warfare, but even they were unsure if they could pull off what was being asked of them. The plan was simple in concept but fraught with danger in execution. Washington intended to split his forces into 3 columns. The main force, led by Washington himself, would cross the Delaware River and march south to Trenton. 2 other groups, led by Generals James Ewing and John Cadwalader, were supposed to cross at different points and prevent any Hessian reinforcements from escaping or coming to Trenton's aid. But as the night wore on, it became clear that the weather was not on their side. A nor'easter swept through the region, bringing with it driving snow, freezing rain, and gale-force winds. The conditions were so brutal that the other 2 columns were unable to complete their crossings, leaving Washington's force to carry out the attack alone. The crossing itself was a Herculean effort. The river was choked with ice, and the small boats, manned by skilled oarsmen from the Marblehead Regiment, were tossed about by the raging waters. Some soldiers fell into the river, their bodies quickly succumbing to the icy depths. Others clung to the sides of the boats, their hands numb, their faces whipped by freezing rain. And yet, through sheer determination and the leadership of Washington, who stood on the banks directing the operation, they made it across. It took hours longer than expected, and by the time the last boat reached the opposite shore, it was nearly 4 a.m. The men were exhausted, soaked to the bone, and facing a 9-mile march to Trenton in some of the worst weather imaginable. The march to Trenton was a test of endurance unlike any other. The snow was knee-deep in places, and the wind cut through the men's thin clothing like a knife. Many of them had wrapped their feet in rags to protect against the cold, but it was little use. Frostbite claimed some, while others simply collapsed from exhaustion. Yet, Washington pressed on, refusing to let his men falter. He knew that if they could not reach Trenton by dawn, the element of surprise would be lost, and the entire operation would end in disaster. As they trudged through the darkness, the only sounds were the crunch of snow underfoot and the occasional cough or groan from the men. But there was something else in the air as well, an unspoken determination, a resolve to see this mission through no matter the cost. Washington's presence at the front of the column was a source of inspiration. Even in the worst of conditions, his calm, unwavering leadership gave his men the strength to carry on. By the time they reached the outskirts of Trenton, the first light of dawn was beginning to break. The men, though near the point of collapse, readied themselves for the final push. The fate of the revolution rested on their shoulders. In Trenton, the Hessians were caught completely off guard. Colonel Johann Rall, the commander of the Hessian garrison, had been warned of a possible American attack, but he had dismissed the intelligence as unlikely. After all, who would be foolish enough to mount an offensive in such terrible weather? The Hessians had spent Christmas night celebrating, confident that the Americans were in no condition to fight. But as Washington's men stormed into the town from two directions, the Hessians were thrown into chaos. The first shots rang out just after sunrise, catching the Hessians completely by surprise. Many of them were still asleep, while others were groggily trying to shake off the effects of the previous night's festivities. They scrambled to their positions, but it was too late. The Americans had the upper hand. The fighting was intense but brief. Washington had divided his forces into two main columns, one led by General Nathaniel Greene and the other by General John Sullivan. Greene's men attacked from the north, while Sullivan's column struck from the west, effectively trapping the Hessians in the town. The streets of Trenton became a scene of confusion and carnage, with gunfire echoing off the buildings and smoke filling the air. The Hessians, though experienced soldiers, were completely unprepared for the ferocity of the American assault. They fought valiantly, but their efforts were disjointed and ineffective. Rall, realizing the gravity of the situation, tried to rally his men for a counterattack. But as he led them into the fray, he was struck by a musket ball. Mortally wounded, Rall was carried from the field, and with him went any hope of an organized Hessian defense. Within 45 minutes, the battle was over. The Hessians had suffered heavy casualties, with nearly 1,000 soldiers captured and another 100 killed or wounded. The Americans, in contrast, had lost only a handful of men, an astonishingly low number given the scale of the attack. As the smoke cleared, Washington stood amidst the captured town, surveying the scene. The victory was absolute. The Hessian prisoners were disarmed and rounded up, their weapons and supplies confiscated by the victorious Americans. For the first time in months, the Continental Army had reason to celebrate. They had not only survived but triumphed against a formidable enemy. But Washington knew that this was only the beginning. The British, now aware of the American presence, would surely retaliate. Trenton was a small victory in the grand scheme of the war, but it was a crucial one. It had proven that the Continental Army was still a force to be reckoned with, and that the Revolution was far from over. The Battle of Trenton was a turning point, not just in terms of military success but in the broader context of the Revolutionary War. For the first time in months, the Continental Army had demonstrated its ability to strike back against the British and their allies. The psychological impact of the victory was profound. It revitalized the patriot cause, inspiring new recruits to join the army and convincing wavering colonists that the fight for independence was still winnable. Washington, ever the strategist, knew that the victory at Trenton needed to be followed by further action. He couldn't allow his men to rest on their laurels. They had to maintain the momentum. Just days after the Battle of Trenton, Washington launched another surprise attack, this time at Princeton. The success of these two engagements, Trenton and Princeton, shifted the balance of power in the Revolutionary War, forcing the British to reevaluate their strategy and giving the Americans a much-needed boost in morale. The significance of the Battle of Trenton extends beyond the immediate military victory. It marked a shift in the war's dynamics, demonstrating that the Continental Army, despite its many hardships, was capable of winning against a superior force. This victory also had a ripple effect, influencing international perceptions of the American cause. European powers, particularly France, began to view the American struggle for independence more favorably, leading to crucial alliances that would later prove decisive. Furthermore, the battle showcased Washington's leadership qualities, his ability to inspire his men, his strategic acumen, and his willingness to take risks when the situation demanded it. The Battle of Trenton is often cited as a testament to Washington's brilliance as a military commander, a quality that would serve him well throughout the remainder of the war. Beyond the strategic and historical significance, the Battle of Trenton was also a deeply human story. The soldiers who fought that day were not just figures in a history book. They were real people, each with their own fears, hopes, and motivations. Many of them were farmers, tradesmen, and laborers who had left their homes to fight for a cause they believed in. They endured unimaginable hardships, hunger, cold, and the constant threat of death, yet they remained steadfast in their commitment to the Revolution. One such soldier was Joseph Martin, a young Continental Army private who later wrote about his experiences. In his memoirs, Martin recalled the terror and exhilaration of the Battle of Trenton, the fear he felt as he crossed the Delaware River, the exhaustion that nearly overwhelmed him during the march, and the adrenaline that surged through him as he charged into the town. Martin's account gives us a glimpse into the mindset of the men who fought at Trenton, revealing the courage and determination that fueled their actions. Another story is that of James Monroe, the future 5th President of the United States, who served as a lieutenant during the battle. Monroe was severely wounded while leading a charge against the Hessians, a wound that would stay with him for the rest of his life. His bravery on that day earned him recognition and marked the beginning of a long and distinguished political career. But for every story of heroism, there were also tales of loss and suffering. The victory at Trenton came at cost, and many families were forever changed by the events of that day. The Hessian soldiers who were captured or killed were far from home, fighting a war that was not their own. Their stories, too, are a reminder of the complexities and tragedies of war. As we remember the Battle of Trenton, it's important to honor not just the victory, but the sacrifices made by those who fought on both sides. The human cost of war is often forgotten in the grand narratives of history, but it is a cost that should never be overlooked. The Battle of Trenton was a defining moment in the American Revolution, a moment when the tide began to turn in favor of the Patriots. It was a victory that brought hope to a cause that had seemed all but lost, and it laid the groundwork for future successes. But more than that, it was a victory that demonstrated the power of determination, leadership, and the willingness to take risks in the face of overwhelming odds. The story of Trenton is a reminder that even in our darkest hours, there is always a path forward, a path that requires courage, determination, and a belief in something greater than oneself. It is a story that continues to resonate, inspiring generations to stand up for what they believe in, no matter the odds. Thank you for joining us on this journey through history. If you found this story as inspiring as we did, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to stay updated on our latest content. We have many more incredible stories to share, stories that remind us of the power of the human spirit and the impact we can have on the world around us.